Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. This is our daily series, drawer making, episode 5, 6. It'll say on the thing. Anyway, so I have 10 children, 6 girls, 4 boys, same wife, and made a lot of chest of drawers over the years, and actually thought every time we would do this, we would bring in a different one and just kind of look at it and show you some features and maybe see some things I wish I had done differently. So this one belongs to my child number 4, Kenzie, and it's been abused, not necessarily by her. So I discovered a long time ago. By the way, I have no idea how old this is, but I'm going to guess and say it was probably early 90s. I figured out a way to make 3 chests of drawers out of 1 sheet of plywood. So this is a piece of MDF core plywood. That's plywood with, instead of veneer core, it has MDF in the middle. Nice thing about it is there's no voids. Plywood often has voids. So this one is just uniform thickness, beautiful stuff to work. So I cut a strip, which would have been, how wide? So 15 3/4 inches wide. So if you were to follow the grain, you should go down there, up, over, and down. And then I banded, in other words, I glued a piece of maple on both sides. You can see the glue line now. So start here in the back. So the back, which I wish I had used different materials, but I must have been hard up at the time. The back is 1/4 inch MCP. It's called melamine covered panel, and that sits in a groove. I always preferred to have the back in a groove instead of sitting in a rabbet. I just think it dresses it up, looks a lot neater. And then these 2 screws go into the dividers, which just gives them a little extra support. Now, if you come over here in the front, we might as well look at the drawers first. So when I did these, if you'll notice, it's the same piece of, I took 1 piece of cherry and I just kept slicing it. I glued the first piece and then the second piece, third piece, fourth piece, and don't mind all the food and whatever else is on them. So you can see right here, you can see the glue joint. So you do a through dovetail first. These are really skinny pins, and I don't do them like that anymore. That's also a 1 7 rake, which would be 8 degrees. And then it's just the width of the saw blade at the top. I was into it back then. So we take that out, have a look at it. I used cedar plywood. That's Tennessee aromatic. Cedar on the bottom. So if you look at the back, I don't know why I have it sticking out that far, but I must be using that as a means of stopping it. I think I actually did. So same construction. There's the groove at the bottom. So the plywood sits in 3 grooves. Now I have little finger recesses here on both sides, and they match up with those cutouts that I have right here. So this has a frame. It keeps it light. So it's got a hardwood frame, be a mortise and tenon joint on all 4 corners, and then a piece of 1/4 inch plywood in between. That just acts as a dust panel. Now, I don't know why, but on this one, I must have run out of that plywood. This has got a piece of melamine in the bottom as well, which I think now that I've got it in here, I'm going to clean it up a little bit. I may change that. It's on 3. I guess she only got cedar on the top one. Anyway, anything I would do differently? I don't like spacing my dovetails like that anymore. The end lap is not enough. That just looks a little bit too weak. So I would have added another 32nd of an inch onto that, which would have just visually, it would have looked a little bit better. Because you don't have anything glued. If you look at it from there to there, there's essentially nothing gluing this little flap of cherry to the end of these pieces. It doesn't stick to the end grain of the tails, and the pins are so skinny there's not enough contact surface there. I'm surprised. It usually sounds hollow when you tap it like that. Nice thing about doing this, especially with kids' drawers, because they have a tendency to climb up. If you put knobs on, they climb up on them and then they eventually get bent or come loose and get lost. This way, it leaves the front nice and clean, and it's just a matter of reaching in with your fingers and opening it. But they've got to operate properly so that you can close them. Yeah, I guess I knew what I was doing back then too. There's no side-to-side movement, and there's just enough top to bottom to keep it from sticking. And then down here, I almost always put a toe kick in there. So there's a piece right in there deep enough. So that's there so that when you're standing here, you can stand close. Otherwise, you'd be out here having to lean forward. Makes it a little more comfortable. Same thing we do on kitchens. All right, let me get cleaned up. Turn the camera off for a second. We get cleaned up, and then we'll get started on our drawers. All right, we're going to lay these out and hopefully cut some tails, but I just realized the first thing I've got to do is I need to finish the inside of these, not the out. The out will come after we've assembled the joint. This is my drawer front. I'm going to use my 5.5. Check and make sure that the blade is not sticking out any amount. You don't want to discover that the blade is out farther than you thought after it drives into the wood. So this is the reason why I prefer this style of plane, because while I'm planing, I'm spinning the adjuster knob with my right hand, and I'll just keep going until it starts to make contact, and it'll tell me whether or not the blade is parallel to the sole based on where the shaving's coming out. Board is wider than the blade, so that means one pass, blade hanging over the left, one pass, blade hanging over the right. Yeah, I still got a little bit of a mark right there. I don't want any plane tracks. No light. So that's what when I set it down like this, if there's any light showing, then you know it's not flat. So that's what I was doing. Now, I got to make sure that this is the up. No, this is, I'm going to write on there. Arrow to the front. Okay, so all the rest of this has already been done previously, which wouldn't normally be the case, but the way we made that one, it had to be. Now this is my back, and this is just another piece of cherry, nothing special about it. Now this one, I'm going to do both sides, meaning front and back.
Because?
Well, because I don't like to trim or flush up the back of the drawer. So if you look at this, the tails go proud of the back. Excuse me. And I like it because it just kind of looks, it's nice sometimes to see the construction. And I think that just looks a little bit, I don't know how to describe that actually. If I come up with a good way, I will share it with you. So because I don't flush up the back, then that means I can't plane this piece after the fact. So I have to do it now. Check, that looks good. Now if I plane this way on this side, to do the other side, you simply flip it end for end. And then you don't have to worry about trying to read the grain on this one. Little wax. The wax simply reduces the friction so that your effort is spent pushing the blade through the wood instead of pushing the plane over the wood. And why do I always pull the shaving out? Because I don't want to have it get sucked underneath the plane when I pull the plane back. Why do I not lift up and do this every time? Well, I may need the exercise, but I don't want it right now. Plus, every time you bring the plane up, pick it up, and set it down again, if you clunk it, you may change the setting of the blade. This way, it's a nice smooth action. I'm just trying to get rid of that snipe. And I think it may just be more a mark. It is. It's just, snipe's not really there. It's just because of the way the wood oxidized. It oxidized more here than there. Now, how do I say that? Now I've got to make that make sense. You can still kind of see a little bit of a shadow right there. There's no snipe, but I took a lot more material off of here, getting down to that, and the oxidation seems to go fairly deep. So I took more material off here than I did right there, so it's still oxidized a little heavier in that one little spot. Nothing to worry about, it'll all catch up sooner or later. Now, the reason why you want this flat is because when you do your dovetails, if this piece isn't flat, meaning across the width, you do your dovetails, it might be tight there, you're going to end up with a gap here and a gap over there. So you want that nice straight baseline to correspond with that nice flat piece. Now we'll clean up. Actually, we're just going to go ahead. I really am. I'm a little bit out of sequence, and I should stop and do it right. But I promised you we'd lay those dovetails out today, so I want to do it. And what I mean by being out of sequence is I haven't planed. I've got to go in there and make that back piece the same as the front. Copy one off of the other, and I haven't done that yet. But it's not critical right at the moment. I am going to go in and straighten the edge. Somebody asked a question about the shooting board. So if you look right here, when we make our shooting boards, we purposely leave a little rabbet right here. So you cut from here down to there, and that little rabbet runs underneath the blade right here. And that keeps the plane from taking a piece of your shooting board every time. And no, I don't bring my fence all the way over to the plane, although it would make sense. It would protect it would protect that little piece from getting broken off. The problem is the first time you make a heavy pass, you're going to take more off, and then you go back to a light pass, it no longer is effective, so I don't bother with it. I think using the little rabbit is a better surefire way of preventing that tear out that occurs. Okay, now what I'm thinking is I'm going to copy these. I'm going to copy those tails exactly onto this one I'm making. But I'll at the same time I'll show you how to lay them out in case you don't already know. So I can assume that these two pieces are the same thickness. They're not. So I took quite a bit off of that front. But I want this to be the same. And I think the setting I used here was the same front and back. So I'm going to go in. I'm going to set my marking gauge right to the base of that pin and lock it. Now the problem is I can't really go in and determine if it's the same setting, but I can do it with a that is a strong 11/16, and that's what that is. So I did use the same one. So I was just checking myself. My thinking on this is it just streamlines the process by using the same setting when you're laying out your tails front and back. Although typically the back is going to be thinner than the drawer front. You have to have a thick drawer front if you're doing a half blind. Well, I shouldn't say you don't have to. I prefer. The reason I like it is there's a couple of things here. I like to elongate the tail and the pin as much as possible. I think it just looks a lot better than a stubby or dovetail. You need to have, as I mentioned on those other ones I showed you, you need to have enough end lap out here covering the joint. that's pretty much ideal. I don't want too much. It starts to look a little clumsy, a little machine made. And if you don't use enough, it's too thin and looks very fragile, and actually is fragile, and you have a risk of somebody bumping that and literally chipping a piece off, because there's no glue contact, remember, between the end of the tail, which is long end grain, to the inside of the end lap, which is long grain. So you're missing one piece, which is the other long grain piece of wood. So what I like to do is just come in here. I've got my setting on the drawer. This is my top left, this side. So on this one, I'm going to have a light pass on the outside. I prefer not to see marking gauge marks when I am done. On the edge, I'm going to make that really deep. You want a good, strong, Paul Sellers calls it a knife wall. You'll see what I mean. On the inside, you can cut a little stronger. And on the top edge, again, nice deep pass. Now on the back, you'll notice that we don't cut the top off on the tailboard. Drawer sides are always the tailboard. Drawer front, drawer back are always the pinboard. We don't cut them off, top or bottom. So this one is only going to be marked on the faces, much like we typically do a pinboard. Okay. Now, same setting. Try to keep these in order. You'll notice I go hard on the inside, where it's not going to matter, nor is it going to be seen. Light on the outside, hard on the edge. The back, only do the inside and the outside face. Now, did we? Yeah, we did. So we cut a rabbit. I call it the 140 trick because it's I use the skew block plane to do it, and that model number that was patterned after a Stanley number 140. That's a Lee Nielsen, and if you're going to get one of these, I recommend the Lee Nielsen. I think it's the best of the ones available. Love the way that it works. So much so that we now are going to provide one to every vet that comes to our workshop as one of our scholarships. Two ways to do it. We can do it on the table saw. Well, there's actually several ways, but I typically do it right here on the bench, but you can also do it on the table saw. Jake, give me a check on time. So what I'm going to do, I got to get this set up. I'm going to go through and put an edge on this real quick, because if you're going to use this plane, you've got to know how to sharpen it. And sometimes people get a little bit worked up because it's on an angle. No big deal. We're going to show you what to do. Two stones, as before. Start with the 500, finish with the 16,000. And I'll come in here real quick and just give that a quick rub. If you want, you can clean it off, but there's people that worry about cross-contamination, meaning carrying the heavier, coarser grit onto the finer grit. I don't have to worry about carrying 16,000 grit onto the 500. The reverse might be possible. Quite honest, I rarely do that. Okay, it's a bevel up, so I'm going to set the blade on that primary bevel. I do a hold. I always use that hole as an indexing point. I've got to squeeze. I've got to hold get as many fingers out there on the cutting edge as I can, and I always want to tie left hand, right hand together. So I'm squeezing like that. Find your primary. Come up a little bit higher. Little circles, tight circles. Lock wrist, locked elbow, pivot from the shoulder. Light to moderate pressure along that cutting edge until you can feel the slight burr. As soon as you get a burr, come over to the 16,000 and do the same thing, except come up a little bit higher than the previous stone. So you're creating a third, also known as a tertiary bevel. Cut your sharpening time down dramatically. Now, no work on the corners. We want this edge to be straight, side to side. About 10 seconds of work. Now, this is the part that's easy, but people sometimes don't understand how to do it. So all you want to do with the ruler trick is hold the blade like that. Instead of it being perpendicular to the side, you want it to be the end of the blade to be, or the edge to be parallel to the side. And just move that forward and back. Now, first time I sharpened this, I created the Charlesworth ruler trick back bevel. Now I'm just having to go in and remove any burr that may have occurred as a result of the sharpening process. All right, now this is can be a little bit tricky to set up, and the reason is it doesn't have any support for the right side of the blade. So when you're making adjustments, advancing and retracting, it often has a tendency to wander off to one side. So I tell people, I said, get it set up and then just leave it. There's no reason to change it. Now I want to get a piece of wood to experiment with, so I'm not having to use my drawer side. Okay, so I've got a scrap, and I'm going to draw a line on there. Same setting that I've already used. Now I want to clamp this in the vise with just a little bit of the board hanging out over the edge. You'll see why. So that's sitting flat. Now when I set mine up, I like to have the blade protruding beyond the edge, just slightly. Now if you need more to look at, pull the fence over so that you have more to eyeball. And I'm sighting down the sole until the blade, which you see right here is a thin black line, you getting it? Looks parallel to the sole. And you don't yet know how much you want to have it protruding, but I'm just going to take a guess. I'm going to lock that. Don't over tighten that spin wheel. Now I'm going to take my fence. This is the tightening thing for my fence, and not bolt. And I want the point of the blade to be right on that gauge line. If you come shy of it, you're going to leave material in the corner. If you go beyond, instead of having a nice clean line there, it's going to be ragged because you will be cutting across the grain. So get that set right on, hold it, and lock that down. Now, you have to start, plane, and end on the same plane. So what I hold it like this. My thumb provides the downward pressure to keep it from drooping. My index finger lays against my auxiliary fence. Now we actually sell these, but I added this. When you buy the plane, you only get the metal parts down below here. You get this, of course. So I'm holding it like that, and my thumb is pushing against it, so it keeps it registered. Now, all this hand is doing is simply pushing forward. And if this is right, if it's set up properly, I should engage the wood with the point of the blade as soon as it touches. Now, I want to make sure that I'm lifting a shaving that is going to eventually be full length, full width, and uniform thickness. Now what I'll do, and let me explain something else. I'm going to do that again. So this is producing the downward pressure. This is keeping it in like that. Don't tip it one way or the other. You want it to lay flat. This hand is merely pushing forward, a little bit of guidance. And when you get here, you have to kind of back off on this or you're going to swing around. So you have to kind of balance that out, and this hand is actually now providing the downward pressure. I think it's always wise to take 2 or 3, maybe even 4 light passes than to try to do it in one heavy pass. Chances are you'll get a better finish, and that's a beautiful finish. And considering you're cutting across the grain, why this instead of a shoulder plane? Well, because the blade is on an angle like that, as you push it through the wood, number one, it's skewing across that face, so it's going to give you a cleaner cut. Number two, it's the action of that, or the angle of that blade pulls the plane this way, keeping it tight to the fence so you don't have to worry about wandering away from that line. Now to verify that this was done right, I'm going to hold this up to the light, And I'm looking at the gap left as a result of the plane. And that gap, while lower than this surface, must be parallel to it in order for that to go together and stay nice and square. This is critical in getting good square joints. You'll see why. I think that setting is okay, but I'm not going to make it nearly that deep. So what I'm going to do, turn the board to the inside. Remember, you have to have some of this hanging out. Of course, it never quite works out, so I need a filler piece in there. This should do. Squeeze too tight and leave a mark. I want this to lay flat. So what I'll do is just tap on the bench dog. So I don't want this running into the side of my bench. That's why the board must be sticking out beyond. Always good to have a nice sharp blade. It should be set exactly the same because I used that the mark I made on that piece of pine was off of the same setting. This is noticeably harder wood. Oh shoot. That's way too heavy of a pass for this stuff. Now what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to retract that. And tighten that up a little bit more too. Now, I'm going to try to save myself on this. I was just starting to say that this is noticeably harder wood. And that would have been fine on a piece of pine, but on this piece of holly, that was too much. So now I got to get down here, but I'm taking a lighter pass. That's still too much. Now, I'm going to put my better eyes on. I want to make sure that when I move that blade that I didn't throw it off. It's sticking out just a little bit, so I'm just going to tap that slightly. Okay. Okay. So there's a nice shaving, but I've got to get down to here. So I'm going to take. That's 2, 3. Okay. I want to do the same on all of them. Okay, let's lay these out. Now, first thing I got to do is my outside half pin. So I know I didn't change the bottom one. Top one might have changed a little bit just from fitting the drawer. So I'm going to come down here and I lay it out from the end. So I'm going to get this measurement right here. Again, better eyes. Close that down just a hair. Okay, so I'll come in from either end and leave a little mark in the board. Now I'll save that so I can use it on the other side. Now this setting, actually I've got lots of videos on laying this out, so I'm just going to show you how to copy it. This setting is going to encompass one tail and one pin. Actually, I don't like to point on that, so I'm going to use this. So I'm going to go from here. Set this so I don't have to balance it. So I'm starting at the far end of one tail. And I'm going to come over to the end of one pin. Okay, so this is one tail and one pin. And now when we step it off, we start in the half pin mark, which is that little divot we just made. Leave a mark. Leave a mark. Now, these are the same width, so they should be the same. Let's go back and see. Leave a mark. Leave a mark. I'm going to go ahead and lay this out, and if it looks too big, I'm going to change it. So I'll use my dovetail marker and a really sharp pencil. But I'm already looking at that and thinking, you know what, that is definitely bigger. So I don't know whether this piece is a little wider or what. Yeah, it is. So that would have been resulting in the sizing that took place. That's why this drawer is a little bit narrower. So I got to close those down. I don't want them to be that big. So what I'll do is I'm going to measure it. I come over here and I'm going to measure these inside pins. So I'll get a divider point on either side of the, okay, right like that. Then I'll come over here and I'm going to take that and putting it in the half pin. I mean, let me draw out these outside ones because it'll make it a lot easier for you to follow. So pencil in the hole. I line squared across the end, up the face. This is a 10-degree rake angle, by the way. Okay, so I'm going to take this setting and I'm going to go out here in the half pin waist. I'm going to leave a little mark. Now what I need to do, in order to duplicate the same size I have over here, I need to open up my dividers, starting on this one, this half pin. Well, I know that's going to be too much, so I'm going to set it right about there. Step, step, and I want to land in that one. That was way too much. Close it down. Step, step, just a little bit off. Remember, whenever you're doing and making adjustments, you're going to, whatever you're trying to do over here, this adjustment is going to be multiplied by the number of times you step. So on a wide joint, a small adjustment here can mean a big amount at the other end. Starting in the half pin mark, step over, and that's right in the line. So now that's exactly where I want it. Now to avoid these marks that I've left here, I'm going to move this over and do it in a clean area. Leave a mark, leave a mark. Then I'll come over here, sit on the same line, and leave a mark, leave a mark. Now I'll go in, get your slope right, put my pen in the hole at a little divot, square my line across the end, come up the face. Skip over one, go to the next. Fortunately, nothing here is going to be seen because it's a half line and it'll all be tucked inside. Okay, now we'll identify the waist somehow. Top, front, and end, and you know exactly what's being removed. Now I'm just going to take a quick look on that, set it up on here. And they look to be the same size. So I need to do the other side and then I need to lay out the back, but we've run out of time because I normally would just go until we finish, but in order to get this posted tonight we have to get it to my son-in-law Frick, so you'll get to see it. Okay, tomorrow we'll pick it up right here. We'll have another chest of drawers for you to look at, see if there's anything on there that turns your crank. Okay, have a good night. We'll see you tomorrow.